Hello, friends. Welcome to LeggLife Podcast. My name is Adam.
My name is Sherry.
Sherry Beth, what episode is this?
51.
It is 51. And this episode, I don't want to say that it is a follow-up to last week, because it's definitely different, but we're sticking with the same kind of theme, aren't we?
Yeah.
What are we talking about today?
Alaska.
We are. So you guys remember last week, we did the Alaska This or That podcast. And we talked a lot about things that we love. In fact, everything on the list, I think, were things that we love about Alaska.
Right. We had a really hard time choosing because they're all things that we love.
They're all things that are so great.
Yep.
And I realized that if you watch our channel, you probably know quickly that we love the state we live in.
Yes.
But the reality is, and this is true anywhere you could live, there are also things that are not so great.
Yeah, and I think that it's easy. I mean, it is easy for us to just talk about how much we love Alaska and the things we love about Alaska. But I think that it's also good sometimes to maybe talk about the things that aren't, like, perfect, because Alaska's not perfect.
Yeah, and I think especially, I mean, we've had a number of viewers that have moved to Alaska. Mm-hmm. And I think it's healthy before you visit a place, before you certainly move to a place, to understand not just the good, but also maybe the hard or the bad.
Yeah.
Especially in a place like Alaska, where it's so easy when you get here to be captivated by beauty.
Yes.
I mean, I know I'm biased. I've never been to a more beautiful state than Alaska. Like, there's not even a close second.
Right.
And so it's easy to just be like, oh my God, like Alaska.
Right.
But
like, there are some things that are not great about it. And so there are some things that are, like, just sort of funny, and we're just gonna kind of laugh our way through those. Mm-hmm. But there are some deeper, heavier things that we're gonna talk about that are not great.
A lot of the things on this list are things that you guys probably would assume would be on things that are hard about Alaska or things you don't like about Alaska list.
Right.
In fact, the first one, we're just going to dive into this, is darkness.
The darkness.
You hear that all of the time.
Yeah, so it's a little easier here in Anchorage. We're far enough south that we don't completely lose daylight. But it gets dark in the winter.
Does the darkness affect you?
Yes.
In what ways?
It just, I'm easily depressed kind of anyway. I think that's sort of just my natural, lean, but in the winter it is harder for me to be positive and be happy because there's just no sunlight to help me out.
Yeah, you go to work in the dark, you come home in the dark.
Right.
Which I know is true about a lot of places in the country, but it is just different when it's like also cold. Yeah, the darkness is one of the things that you hear about just a ton.
Yeah.
Of course, there are like sad lights for people who suffer with seasonal disorder. However, nothing really replaces the sun.
Right.
So as we go through this, Sherry, and I'm realizing you and I haven't talked about this.
Right.
So I'm going to spur something on you real quick.
Oh, okay.
I think it'd be helpful as we talk about these things if we have things that we do to kind of combat the hard things of Alaska.
Yeah.
Let's touch on that. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, curveball. Sorry.
Some of them there's not really...
Nope, there's not.
There's just not really a way to deal with them.
That's true. They just are.
They just are.
But darkness.
There are the sad lights. There is vitamin D that you can up in the winter.
Yep. One of the things that's worked well for you in years past actually was tanning.
Tanning. Yep. Like
a noticeable difference in you when you would just go even spend like 10 minutes in a bed.
Yeah. Even really just a few. The beds that I go to, I think 10 minutes is like the max that you can go. And so even just going for, 2 or 3 or 5 minutes is like, I feel so much better just getting a little bit of that UV.
100% agree. One thing that is really helpful for me is that during times of the day when the sun is out, again, Sherry mentioned earlier, being here in Anchorage, we never have a time when the sun is, we get sunlight every day.
Right. Well, daylight every day.
Daylight every day, right. Opening the windows, like the blinds, and even letting what little daylight we have come in.
Yeah.
And then also just being intentional about getting out. I know that sounds crazy, but, if you just hole up inside, like depression sets in quickly. You have to almost force yourself, kind of, to go out and do stuff. When the sun is out,
get some fresh air.
You really do, and it makes
in those 4 or 5 hours of daylight.
that is the game changer for me.
Yep.
I've found that when I sit in the office all day, and then the only time I'm outside is either in the morning before the sun's up or in the evening after it's down. Like that's bad news bears.
Yeah.
So just kind of intentionality. Anything else on the darkness that we do?
I don't think so.
Actually, I do have one more
okay.
thing. Some of you guys may have noticed if you've watched kind of our life rhythms, we try to get out of Alaska in December, January, February.
Those are the darkest months.
The darkest months. And so the darkest months, the coldest months. And so I think that if you're going to live here, at least for us, we have to prioritize getting out in the months that it can be the hardest.
Right, taking a vacation to somewhere usually warm.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons, I had this idea for this podcast actually last year sometime. But it's weird to make a podcast about things we don't like about Alaska in August when you love Alaska.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I was like, nope, this is a podcast that needs to happen in January or February.
Right, when it's kind of the forefront of our mind of like what we don't like about Alaska.
Yeah, so that's what we're talking about.
Get us out.
So that's the darkness. Obviously, one of the things that people think the most of, probably the next thing people think the most of, Sherry, is the
Cold,
snow, ice, all of that.
Yeah.
How's it for you?
So I grew up in northern Indiana, and there's that lake effect snow off of Lake Michigan. There's those awful, awful temperatures where it's not, like, temperature-wise, it actually is not as cold as here. According to the thermometer. But with that wind chill, with that humidity, it is cold.
Yep, it's different.
And so really, like, coming up here wasn't, like, the winters aren't that different from what I grew up with. They're darker.
It didn't seem like you went from, a Midwest winter, which is, like, kind of mild, to, like, frozen tundra Alaska. It's not like it was more severe here.
No. Which is good, but also I have a hard time, like, standing on my own 2 feet on, like, flat solid ground, and so when it's icy or snowy or whatever, like, I'd fall all the time. I've gotten better.
I've gotten better. Props to you.
Yeah.
Because your first number of years here, it was, multiple
every time I stepped outside.
Well, that's not true. But it was multiple times a winter that you would fall.
Yeah.
And it now seems like maybe once or twice a winter?
Yeah, I've gotten better. And so we can talk about the way to combat that. You walk flat-footed.
It's so, you got to change the way you walk.
You have to change the way you walk. You can't just, like, walk like a normal person. You have to walk weird. And, like, put your full foot down flat on every step, and it's weird, but it balances better, and I don't fall as much. So yeah, it's just, I don't know, like, you just find ways to deal with it, but I also just don't like the snow or the cold.
You don't like being in the snow?
I don't like being in it. I love watching it snow from inside, like under a blanket with a fire going with a book. That's, like, my favorite. But I don't want to be out in it.
Totally. So darkness and cold, probably the two things that people think of when they think of Alaska winter.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move into some other things. This next one is one that a lot of people struggle with when they move to Alaska.
Yeah.
That is the distance.
Yeah, I don't think people realize how far it is to get here.
Yeah.
So, like, the shortest flight for us to get out of Alaska into, like, another part of the United States is Anchorage to Seattle.
Which is about 3 hours.
Us, and it's about 3 hours. So a lot of people are like, a 3-hour flight? That's ridiculous. Like, I could never do that. That's our shortest flight ever.
I know.
And so, like, when, we're talking about 6-hour flights and people are losing their minds, we're just like, no, that's, like, normal. Like, that's just what it is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think the distance is something that people just don't really realize, because part of it, I think, is, every map has Alaska down by Hawaii, and that's just not where we're at. But but it's quite the distance from the rest of the United States.
Totally. And so, distance from family, you can feel very detached from all that stuff. I think that one of the things that we do, or a couple of things that really help us not feel so far away, well, honestly, technology is a big deal. Technology,
and really, so I moved up here 18 years ago, and even just in the last 18 years, technology has come a really long way. So now it's just nothing to, like, FaceTime family. FaceTime wasn't a thing when I moved up here. It was, like, email and phone calls, and, like, that was the extent of what you could do. So technology has made a big difference, I think.
I think another thing that's made a big difference, I remember Auburn saying something on one of her trips up here. I don't remember which one it was. about how she always thought of Alaska as so inaccessible. It just feels so far away. But once you do it, you realize it's like, oh, it's actually not that bad.
Right.
And I think one of the things that's helped that is actually, because of our growing tourism numbers, there are just more flights here.
Right.
Right? Like, you can fly direct Anchorage to Atlanta. That's crazy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, direct
That's a long flight.
That's a long flight. But it's like one flight, you get, it's like, what? Georgia to
of the country to the
Alaska?
other. Yep.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just feel like even the growth of tourism and travel in Alaska, with an increase in flights and all that kind of stuff, has made it not quite so far away. It still takes a while. One of my favorite things, though, Sherry, and you touched on this, is travel to us, if we live here, hours of travel just really isn't that big of a deal.
No, it's like 2 hours to Seward. That's like the shortest. Like 4 hours, 5 hours to Homer. It's 7 hours to Fairbanks. It's like in driving. And so, people that are like, ugh, like this town's like half an hour away. Like I can't, I'm not driving all the way over there. Like everything is just far away for us.
Yeah, and it's like if we had a friend who flew into Fairbanks and we hadn't seen them, even though that's like a 5.5 hour drive, we would go see them.
Of course.
And that's so funny because, like, can you imagine most places, like...
We'd make a weekend of it.
Yeah, it's like, oh, perfect. Yeah, we'll drive up. But, like, most places around the country, it's like, you're 5.5 hours away. I'm not going to come see you.
Right.
So it's like, what?
That's too far.
But I think because of the size of Alaska, like, we're just used to traveling long distances, even just, like, with life here.
Right.
And so it makes our long distance travel easier, I think.
Now, I will say it is funny to me that, so, like, yeah, it's just like, oh, well, let's go to Seward for the day, and it's a 2 hour drive. So 4 hours driving, there and back. But if we have, people that live in the east side of Anchorage, it's, a half an hour drive from us, we're like, no, that's too far.
I haven't seen them in years. Yeah.
We live in the same city, but we're like, so far.
We used to drive 2 hours because the only Dairy Queen was a 2 hour in a town 2 hours away. We used to drive down there on like a nice sunny summer day just to get ice cream
and then drive back. Like we were in Soldotna for 15 minutes and we'd drive back.
Now, to be fair, I think a peanut butter parfait is always worth 4 hours. But okay, so now let's move into a couple other things. This next one, Sherry, this one's for me.
That one's for you because I don't care.
What?
Well,
we have no professional sports teams.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You guys, I am a huge sports fan, and I'm a huge live sports fan. I have been to Major League Baseball games, I've been to NFL games, I've been to NHL games, I've been to NBA games, I've been to college football. I mean, you name it, I will go. Even if it's a team that I don't like. Like, if I'm in San Francisco, California, and the worst football team in the history of the world, the San Francisco 49ers... Sorry, Justin Zachman, are in town playing, I would probably go. Granted, it's easy to get tickets because nobody goes and sees them, but not the point. We don't have that in Alaska.
Yeah.
Like, we have local sports, we have high school sports, we have, like, some college stuff, but nothing...
But no big college sports and no football team.
And I miss that. And so... so I miss that. And so I just wish we had something. We used to have, like, a semi-pro professional hockey team that was a part of like the St. Louis Blues organization. But I don't know. I miss that.
Yeah, because again, like the closest city to go see pro sports is Seattle. So it's a 3 hour flight. Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons that, Seattle sports fans typically, are loyal to, or Alaskans are typically loyal to Seattle sports teams. That's kind of
like the default.
It's like our home team.
Yeah, it's the closest city.
But it's a 3 hour flight away.
3 hour flight, so it's not like you could just go to the game and then go home. Like, it's a weekend ordeal.
Although
and it's.
I have flown down on a Sunday morning, gone to a Seahawks game, and flown home on a Sunday night. Like I will say, loved it. One of my favorite experiences. Okay, next. This is one that gets you and I.
Yeah. Okay. So this one has a bunch of different like facets to it. We're going to talk national chains, but we're gonna talk about a bunch of different facets of them.
Okay, so first of all, you've been in Alaska for 18 years. Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
Yeah.
When you moved here, we did not have nearly the amount of national chains we do now.
Very few. Yep.
But one of the hard things about living in Alaska is that we still get all of the national chain commercials, even for places we don't have.
Correct. And I just remember, so we do have an Olive Garden now, but we didn't for a long time. And I just remember watching TV and these Olive Garden commercials would come on, and I'm just like, For the love of, like, why? Why do they give us these commercials when we can't even go to a freaking Olive Garden? We don't have one.
If I see an Olive Garden breadstick on TV,
I immediately need... Right.
Yep.
I need the Olive Garden breadstick.
Completely.
And it's rude.
It is rude.
It's, I don't know. And we have gotten a lot more chains in the last 18 years, which is great. But
still, we see Chick-fil-A commercials.
We see Chick-fil-A commercials.
It's so annoying.
I know. And I forgot. Nothing else is coming to mind right
now. Only Chick-fil-A is all we care about.
We don't have any Chick-fil-A's.
But it's not just that we get their commercials, we don't have them. Because then there's like the opposite side of that coin. Right. When they come here, people in Alaska lose their freaking mind.
They lose their damn minds. And it's hours to wait. So going back to Olive Garden. When the first Olive Garden opened up here, the wait was so long that people would go and put their name in and get their little buzzer thing and go watch a movie across the parking lot. Yep. And then come back and finish out their wait.
Yep.
Finish out their, like, it's not just like, oh, it went off halfway through the movie. Oh, no, it didn't. Your wait was 3+ hours.
Yeah, and that's for a couple of reasons. It's really interesting. When you look at national chains that open up here, almost without fail, every, like, monthly, daily, weekly sales record gets shattered.
Right.
Basically, they print money because of how many people go to them.
Right.
And that happens for a couple of reasons. It happens because, the majority of people in Alaska are from other places. Mm-hmm. And so, like, maybe you grew up in the South and you loved Raising Cane's, and then all of a sudden you've moved to Alaska and all of a sudden Raising Cane's opens. It's like, you know what? Yes, I'm going to wait 2 hours for some chicken strips and cane sauce. And that's what happens.
And people wait. And Dairy Queen, same thing. Like, the only Dairy Queen we had was in Soldotna and 2 hours away. And so when Anchorage got their first one, like, the drive-through line was hours. Again. And people are just sitting waiting for their ice cream. I'm just like, what? Oh, okay.
But, to be fair about that, it is a peanut butter parfait.
Well, sure.
It's worth
but you could have driven to Soldotna and back before...
That's true. That is true.
Like, I don't know. So, and that's it drives me crazy that every single chain that comes up here, it's not just like there's one that's missed. Like,
no.
Every single chain that comes up here is hours long for like the first 6 months. Like, we don't even try to go.
No, in fact, Sonic is about to open their first restaurant in Anchorage here soon. They have one in Wasilla, they have one in Fairbanks, but they don't have one in Anchorage. And the reality is, it would be a shorter wait for Sherry and I to drive the 45 minutes to Wasilla and go to the Sonic out there.
And then eat it and then drive home.
Rather than wait for what the line will be at the Sonic in Anchorage.
Correct.
It's like, then that's not even an exaggeration.
It's going to be ridiculous.
It's going to be crazy.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, I guess we'll go to the Sonic 6 months after it opens.
Right.
So
it's so weird.
Okay, another thing with national chains. You guys, we're not done yet.
No, we're not done.
Let's talk prices. $5 foot longs.
Lies. It's all lies.
Subway.
Big fat lies.
You sit on a throne of $5 lies.
Correct. So, change a commercial. I don't know, because the $5 foot long has never, ever, ever been $5 here in Anchorage.
In Alaska, it's like a $6 foot long. Some places off the road system, $7. You get to rural Alaska, $8, $9, $10, $11 foot longs. I've never had a $5 foot long in my life.
Correct. And so I just feel like their commercial is just spouting lies.
And that really is it.
It just bugs me. Like, that commercial comes on with that little catchy jingle, and it's just like, you're lies. You are lies.
Here's the thing. Every now and then, they do try to change it. And it's always really funny because you see the national commercial. It's like $5 foot long. And then there's like the local Subway commercial, and they're like $6 foot long. And you're like, stop.
Well, because I feel like it's always filmed on, like, a flip cam. Like, what? Like, why is the quality so bad?
So funny.
I don't know. It's just weird.
Okay.
Anyway, okay. So, speaking of other national chains that we do not have.
Yeah.
When it comes to shipping.
Oh, this is annoying.
This is so frustrating to me. So,
you get... I don't want to say irrationally, because I think it's rational, but there are times that you get so mad at this that I just need to, like, remove the knives from your vicinity and let you go.
Well, sure, because I feel like, well, and part of it is just that people are stupid. And so If you don't want to ship all the way to Alaska, fine, say that. But don't say that you ship to the United States, but not to Alaska, because that just makes you look stupid.
And there are so many companies that you go on their website and they're like, oh, ship
everywhere in the U.S., no international shipping.
And so it's like, cool, I'm going to place an order. And then you like load your cart up, you get everything, you're checking out, you put in your address, and they're like, we don't ship to Alaska.
But you said you shipped to the United States.
We're part of the freaking United States.
We are part of the freaking United States. And it just makes you look ignorant.
I would argue we're the best part of the United States.
Correct. And I just feel like it just makes those companies look stupid. But it also, like, it's so frustrating. Like, it's just, why? There's no reason. FedEx has a hub here. There is zero reason that people can't ship to Alaska.
I think Anchorage is one of the 5 largest FedEx hubs in the world.
Yes.
Which is insane.
Right.
And that is one of the annoying things, is that all of these other companies have figured out the logistics of shipping to Alaska. Yet there's some companies that it feels lazy.
It 100% is. And it's just so annoying. So it's gotten better since I moved up here, but I do remember several times ordering something and having to send it to my mom's house or to my sister's house and then have them ship it to me USPS because whatever company just would not ship to Alaska.
Well, it's interesting because this is kind of this is a part of the economy that exists here that probably doesn't other places. There are businesses here that basically exist. They're almost like freight forwarders. So you can't have something, we couldn't have something shipped here to our house. Let's say we ordered something from IKEA. And it's like, we want to place all these orders for these things from IKEA, but they're like, nope, don't ship. So there's these companies here that you basically make your purchase through them, and they ship everything to an address they have, like in Seattle.
Right, they have a warehouse in Seattle, and then they ship it up here.
And so there's like all of these other like businesses that have been created to get around the no shipping to Alaska issue.
Right. And it's just, it just makes me angry. So, and that adds cost because these companies are doing this for free. So you're shipping it to their warehouse and then they ship it up here to you.
Yep.
And there's a cost to that. So now you're shipping it twice. So that's just, I hate that too. But also, like, if companies do ship to Alaska, they, for whatever reason, feel the need to price gouge.
Yeah, on some things, not on all things.
I feel like there's several things. So I'm going to talk for a minute about Hobby Lobby.
Oh, let's do it.
So part of some of my ears that I make, I use like this glitter foam, this glitter foam. Very light. Like it weighs nothing. And it was like $19.95 for like this big pack of it. And it was $39.95 to ship it.
How much?
$39.95.
$40.
To ship a $20 product.
Yep.
I think that's lies. I think that's lazy. There's no way that this 8.5 by 11 foam was going to cost $40 to ship.
No.
No way.
No.
And so like it's that kind of stuff. I'm like, there is absolutely no reason that this is necessary.
Okay. Take a breath. I need you guys, this is the issue that gets Sherry going so much.
Oh my gosh.
Like, we don't ship to Alaska. If you want to see Sherry put together a string of curse words, like,
very creative.
Even that would make sailors' ears turn red. Like, just talk about no shipping to Alaska.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Okay, deep breath.
Yeah, we're going to move on.
Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about also is cost.
But
this is more about the cost once you live here.
Yeah.
So Alaska. Or to visit. Alaska, as we said, naturally, stunningly beautiful. Yes. It's crazy.
Yes.
But to really fully get out and experience all of Alaska can be very expensive.
Yes. Yeah. So, thinking cruising, cruising to Alaska is astronomically expensive. More expensive than other cruises.
Well, sure, but I'm even thinking like once you're here, flight scene is very expensive.
Flight scene is very expensive.
Whale watching is very expensive. I mean,
getting it to like get out and experience Alaska is very expensive.
Even the boat from Juneau to Skagway, the ferry we took, was like $750.
Yeah.
Like it's very expensive.
Yes.
And so I love Alaska. Now, and granted, you can get out and you can rent a kayak and you can go camping in a tent and there's a lot of ways to experience Alaska. Hikes are free. There's a lot of ways to experience Alaska that are not expensive, but there's a lot of things that are very expensive.
Yeah.
And so I think that sometimes, I know this was even the case for us for a long time, you end up not doing a lot of things locally because it's like, well, if I'm going to spend $2,000 on a trip, like, let's go to California,
Right.
rather than like just be here in our state. Yet, I mean, we've spent more the last 2 summers, we've spent more money experiencing and exploring Alaska than the previous 16 years you've lived here.
Yeah.
Hands down.
Yeah.
And
part of that was that we just made that a priority, and that's where we put our money, so we didn't really do other vacations.
Completely. And so that is a negative, is that it's like, man, you live in this amazing, beautiful place, yet there are so many people who live here who have never seen it by a small plane, flying over mountain passes, or have never been out on a whale watching tour or a snow machine adventure like I went on, because like the cost to do those things can be prohibitive.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right, Sherry.
Yeah.
What's next on our list?
Mosquitoes.
Okay. Well, actually, that's the thing after, but it's okay.
Well, we sort of talked about that. Do you want to talk about that?
I do want to talk about that a little bit more. Sorry, you guys. I'm fidgeting with stuff in my hands. I'm going to move it. I want to talk about, before we get to mosquitoes, I do want to talk about this next thing, and that's the transient nature of Alaska.
Yeah.
We have a state that has a high population turnover, largely because of the kind of industries we have.
Yeah.
We have a lot of seasonal workers. We have a lot of
military.
And so Alaska is the kind of place where a lot of people live for a season. Some people, I know a lot of people, they're like, you know what? Let's move to Alaska in our early to mid 20s, get these great high paying jobs, like work a year or two, like have a great job on a resume, make a bunch of money, and then just like go start my life somewhere.
Yeah.
With like this huge head start.
Yeah.
The problem when you live here, when the population is so transient, is that a lot of friends come and go.
Yeah, we've had a lot of friends leave.
Yep. And so you always create friendships, but sometimes Alaska can feel like a hard place to have deep roots because of how often people come and go.
Yeah.
And that hasn't been the easiest thing for us.
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, I do feel like our, kind of friend groups have morphed and shifted a lot over the course of our marriage. And some of that is just natural, like that, people's orbits just sort of, move away and come closer and move away.
Totally.
People that still live here, it's been kind of this back and forth, but especially when people move, it's really hard to maintain the kind of friendship that we had when we were like in each other's living rooms 3 or 4 times a week.
Yeah, and so I do think that's one of the things that you do have to know as you're building relationships here in Alaska, is that some friendships may be, physical in person for a season, and then it's like, well, you figure out how to be friends from thousands of miles away.
Right.
So that can be hard. Now let's get to mosquitoes.
Now we'll talk about mosquitoes.
Those bloodsuckers.
Yeah, the state bird.
Yep. So, okay, you're going to have to lead on this one, because I've always felt like the whole Alaska mosquito thing is overblown.
It's not.
Really?
No. So here's the thing. I grew up in Indiana. And quite a bit of my growing up was in pretty rural Indiana, where we had like cornfields and stuff, where if there's any water sitting, that's where mosquitoes breed.
Totally.
So I grew up with mosquitoes. They're a different breed here.
Okay, in what ways?
They're bigger. I feel like they're a lot more aggressive.
Interesting.
I feel like they swarm here, and I don't know. I feel like I don't remember sitting outside in like, fire pits and stuff growing up and just being miserable because I'm being attacked.
Yeah.
Which is almost always the case here. Like if you're not covered in some kind of mosquito repellent, and even then sometimes like you're just being attacked constantly.
Man, okay.
And going on like walks down like our coastal trails and stuff, I feel like you walk through like swarms of mosquitoes. And so even like at the top of what mountain we were in Juneau, we turned back because the mosquitoes were so bad.
So I think here's my thing with mosquitoes, is that I have been in places where they are so bad you have to stop what you're doing. I think of Juneau. I think of on the RV trip. Do you remember we stopped in that one mountain pass?
Yeah.
And like got outside. And so I think to me, yes, there are places where they are horrible. I guess what I just don't feel like I ever experienced that here. Like Anchorage. If we go out camping in the woods, sure. But for me, people just make it seem like, oh, you visit Alaska and like the whole time you're outside, you're just getting killed by mosquitoes. And I don't know. Also, maybe mosquitoes don't love my blood as much as other people because I just don't feel like they're that big of a deal, with exceptions when you get in places of the state that they are just horrible.
Yeah, I mean, I even feel like we've taken walks just down on like Campbell Trail and stuff, and they're bad. And sitting outside like on our patio, they're bad.
Weird.
And so we've like put plants out there, and we've put, candles and stuff out there, and I just don't feel like there's much that we can do to just make them stop attacking.
So there you go.
Mosquitoes.
Apparently mosquitoes are bad. Next thing, we're going to talk a little natural disaster.
Yeah.
So yes, earthquakes, of course. Some people, I will say, I've actually been surprised when we do like Instagram lives or we post YouTube videos about like the earthquake. A lot of people are like, oh, I didn't know you guys had earthquakes in Alaska. Alaska's on the Ring of Fire, has more earthquakes than any other state in the United States. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, earthquakes are a part of life here.
Yeah.
And a sucky part of life
here. It's a not fun part of life. We don't often have the really big ones.
Nope.
But we've had several since I've been here.
I was going to say, in your 18 years... I
feel like it's every few years.
In your 18 years of being here, how many earthquakes do you think we've had that were like, I'm going to say scary? Because I mean, we've had hundreds, thousands of earthquakes. But like ones that were like truly scary.
3 that I can think of.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say 3 or 4.
Right. So, 3 or 4 in the 18 years that I've been here that were like truly like, we might not make it out.
Well, I would say that in that time for me, one where I thought there's a chance we die. Yeah. And others that I was scared, but never to the we might die thing. But one, again, that was the November 2018 earthquake where I was like, I don't know that we make it. Like I don't know that we or our house make it out of this.
Yeah.
That was the most terrifying experience of my life.
Yeah. So we do have, and then honestly, like we were talking about this the other day with some other friends, the worst part of those kinds of earthquakes, we've had a few of those, are the aftershocks.
Oh.
So that one in 2018, we had 3,500 aftershocks.
It was genuinely insane.
That were like over whatever, like feelable. So we get 2s and 3s kind of all the time, and we don't really feel those. But 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s.
We didn't have 3,500 of those.
No.
Yeah, just to be clear.
No, but we had like 3,500 like feelable earthquakes, aftershocks over the course of like 18 months.
Okay.
And it was like that was the traumatizing part because I just felt like there were so many, especially the first several months afterwards. Like it was just, they were just constant and they were big, and I was constantly on edge with those.
Yeah, they are terrifying.
Yes.
Especially when they get to that size.
Yeah.
The next kind of disaster sort of thing is one that a lot of people don't know about. And
right.
it's one of those things that I feel like every year we have several times. And that is windstorms.
Windstorms.
So this is kind of a timely conversation because even just the last couple weeks, just north of us in the Palmer-Wasilla area, they got crushed.
Yeah, and so like hurricane force, like 100, 120 mile an hour winds that just take out buildings and roofs off of buildings and
we have friends
flip semis over.
We have friends who live in like a Bear Valley part of Anchorage, which is up in the mountains, and it's like it's nothing for them to clock 100 mile an hour winds.
Right.
Which is just insane. It's like if there was that kind of a storm that hit any other part of the country, it would be like news.
Right. Well, it's hurricane force, so you think of like hurricanes that hit Florida and Texas and like those southern states, and it's terrible.
Yeah, for us it's just a storm.
But for us, it's just a storm. But it's not, because even in the last couple of weeks that Palmer and Wasilla got hit so hard, it was all of that force plus minus 25 degrees.
Yeah, well, that's the hard part, is that wind normally does one of two things in Alaska in the winter. Windstorms either make it really cold or really warm. Mm-hmm. It depends on the jet flow, like the jet stream, where we're getting the air from. Mm-hmm. And so it's crazy because it can be, you get 25 below plus wind chills.
Right.
Or it can make it 40 or 50 degrees and all of a sudden all of the snow starts melting so crazy quick.
Right.
Like windstorms normally either bring really cold or really warm weather here
mm-hmm.
in the winter.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's always surprising. Without fail, every winter when we get our big windstorms, you always see people posting on social media who like just moved here. They're like, I didn't know this was a thing here, and it's like, oh yeah, this is.
Oh, for sure. Yep.
This is just part of it.
Yep. Like we just don't leave any loose things outside because they will blow away.
I remember a friend. This was just a couple of years ago, who lives kind of up in that part of town where they get a lot of winds, telling a story about her neighbor had a trampoline in their yard mm-hmm. and looking outside and like one of those giant trampolines and like looking up and watching the trampoline way up in the sky blown over her house.
Right.
Just like, oh, there's the trampoline like literally up in the air like a sail, mm-hmm. just like flying away.
Right. Because and it's just, it's crazy what these storms do. So I grew up with tornadoes.
Mm-hmm. I think it's pronounced tornadoes.
It's not.
Sounds fancier.
All right. And, but I think the thing with tornadoes and hurricanes and that kind of stuff is that you can predict them.
Yeah, completely.
To a certain extent. You can see them coming. Very rarely do tornadoes just touch down and demolish. Like there's usually weather patterns that are like, hey, a tornado is possible. And there's the tornado watch. And there's then the tornado warning when it touches down. Like, and then you can kind of tell if you're in the path or not. Like with earthquakes, it just is.
That to me is the scariest thing about earthquakes.
Right. Oh, the earth is going to swallow me right now. Okay.
Like we're sitting here recording this podcast and we could have an earthquake right now that literally destroyed our house with no notice, no warning, no anything.
Right. Like there's no way to predict them at all.
That's the most terrifying thing to me.
Yes.
And how that big earthquake we had back in 2018, how violent it is. And there's no, here's the thing, is that there's no way to describe the violence of that.
Right.
Because any way you try to describe it feels inadequate.
It feels less than. The best way that I have been able to figure out how is if you take a dollhouse with like the little peoples inside and you just shake it like a cocktail shaker.
Just violently.
Yep. Mm-hmm. That's what it felt like. It felt like we were the people inside, and this was just our house was just being shaken like a cocktail shaker.
Yeah, so somebody picked it up and was just going crazy.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
That's what it felt like.
All right, so that's earthquakes and windstorms. We only have one thing left, and actually this, I would argue this is the hardest thing about Alaska on a grand scale.
Yeah, and this is also something that a lot of people don't know about or talk about.
A lot of, and actually this is pretty timely because I just talked about this earlier tonight in a training I led. A lot of times when you think about Alaska, the focus is on what is beautiful, right? It's the mountains, the glaciers, the experiences, the untouched wilderness, all that stuff that, sometimes we feature in our videos. Mm-hmm. But the reality is as beautiful as Alaska is, it is just as broken culturally.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know that most of the statistics that you do not want to be number one in, we are. Things like domestic violence, things like substance abuse, things like sexual assault.
Suicide.
Things like suicide. In fact, Native Alaskan men from 18 to 24 have the highest percentage of suicide of any demographic in the entire country. There is no group of people who take their lives more often than young Alaskan Native men. Mm-hmm. And there's just this brokenness in our culture here that is just really heavy and really hard.
Yeah.
And sometimes that surprises people. And I know that part of it is because of the work that I do. In fact, a lot of people, you guys know that I work in the anti-trafficking world. And one of the first questions we always get is, Alaska? Like human trafficking in Alaska? Like I thought that was Thailand, or I thought that was Vietnam, Southeast Asia. Here in the U.S., I thought it was, Atlanta, Houston, Orlando, those kind of places. You don't think about Alaska, about trafficking. But back in 2017, there was actually a study done by Covenant House, which is a youth homeless shelter, and Loyola University. They wanted to look at rates of human trafficking among homeless youth. And so they did this study at Covenant House locations across North America. And these were big cities like Seattle, Vancouver, Detroit, Toronto, like big metropolitan areas. And Anchorage was one of them. And it's funny because...
It's not a big metropolitan area.
Well, no. And it's funny because when we first looked at the list of cities, it was almost like we don't fit on this list at all.
Right, because all these cities have millions of people and we're capping out at 300,000.
Yeah, it's like Anchorage. And yet when the results came back, Anchorage by far had the highest percentage of human trafficking among our youth. And a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to be in Toronto and talk to somebody who was a part of this study. And I'll never forget what was said was that it wasn't just that the numbers here were so bad. It was that the stories were so horrific. And so even things like human trafficking is, we were number one on that list. That is not a list you want to be number one on.
That's not a list you want to be on.
Completely. And so I think that's one of the things that I don't like about Alaska, and that can be hard about Alaska, is that it is naturally the most beautiful place, yet I would argue culturally and socially the most broken place.
Yeah.
And those two things exist in one state.
Yep.
Right? Incredibly broken, yet incredibly beautiful. And trying to like deal with that or live in that tension can be a lot here.
Yes.
So yeah, that to me is one of the things that is really hard about being here.
It is. And I think that it's something that people don't maybe know. But it's so important, I think, to let people know that it's not good. I mean, it's definitely, it's one of the ugly things of Alaska.
Yeah, it is. And I think that a couple things can happen is that there can be people who move here who kind of bury their head in the sand and almost like don't want to see, they want to focus so much on what's beautiful that they don't focus on what's broken.
Right.
But the reality is like, if we're going to be, like good humans who are kind for no reason, and who make our state and our culture better. And
let people know they matter.
We have to look at things that are broken. And we have to help those things be better. We have to, cause change where we can and bring justice where there's injustice. And I just feel like to be a good citizen, you have to look at what is broken, not just what is beautiful.
Yep.
And so that to me is what is mostly broken here in our state.
Agreed.
So you guys, those are the things that we don't like about living in Alaska.
I'm sorry I got angry.
No, as soon as we put like shipping costs on this list, I knew it's like, well, we're gonna get to see Sherry pissed.
Yeah, I feel like I held back pretty well though.
You didn't curse.
I didn't curse.
Which is shocking.
Right.
Because earlier you were like, can I say this? And you said a couple words together and I was like, you for sure can't say that. like there's a lot of things you can say.
We did have somebody say that was their favorite part of the podcast was me cursing.
Yeah. It is the unfiltered Sherry that I get to see every day that YouTube does not get to see.
Correct.
So friends, that's our list.
Yep.
And I do want to end this podcast by just kind of reminding you of something we said at the beginning. Alaska is freaking amazing.
Yes, it is.
But just like everywhere in the world, there are things that are not. Right? And I think that sometimes you can focus on all that is good and ignore the things that are bad. And
right. Or you can focus on all that is bad and ignore the things that are good.
So that's actually,
and I don't think that either one of those is a good place to live.
That's what I was just going to say, because we've seen people who have moved to Alaska who have focused only on the bad things and hated it and left within weeks.
Right.
You
Months. But yeah, it was like, they were here for just such a short amount of time. They never actually really got to experience Alaska because everything that they saw, they hated. But they weren't looking for anything good either. No,
it came into it with focusing on this list.
Right.
And so I think that that's the key, no matter whether you live in Alaska or whether you live anywhere. What are the things that are beautiful? where you live. There are. I've never traveled a place in this entire country that I have not found beauty.
Yep.
And I think that it's important to look for the beautiful things where you live. I also think it's important that if you live somewhere, look for the things that are broken and say, how in the world can I help? How can I make this less broken in the place that I call home?
Yeah.
There you go. There's my little challenge.
Good job, Pastor Adam.
Thanks. So here's the way this works is some of you might be listening on Apple. Some of you might be listening on Spotify or Google, any other podcast platform. We want you guys to head over to YouTube. Want you to type in LeggLife Podcast. Do a couple things. Number one, subscribe.
Yep.
Let's get those subscription numbers up over on YouTube. But then find this podcast on the LeggLife Podcast YouTube channel. And let us know. I don't know, Sherry, what should we ask them? What do we want to hear from them this time?
What is one thing that you love about the place you live and one thing that you don't love about the place you live?
Oh, I love that. Give us something that is beautiful and give us something that is broken.
Yep.
Yeah, dang, Sherry. Look at you go.
Yeah.
So head over to YouTube, LeggLife Podcast. Something that is beautiful and something that is broken. And we just felt like, I don't know, it's January. It's dark.
It's easier to focus on the broken things right now.
It's cold. And that's the truth. It is easier to focus on the broken things.
Yeah.
When it is June and it's 75 degrees and sunny and gorgeous, and I can sit outside and drink beers at breweries and go on hikes during the day, to me, I'm like, there's nothing wrong with Alaska.
You know, there is one thing that I absolutely hate about summer in Alaska.
Oh, I'm so intrigued.
The birds.
What do you mean?
We have birds that live in the tree right outside our bedroom window. One of these days, I'm just going to shoot them dead because they drive me crazy.
Yeah, it's the reason I'm not going to give you a gun. I'm going to be honest. Because, you would miss and, pelt a building next to us, and then...
Oh, my gosh. They're awful.
Yeah.
I don't even know what kind of bird it is. It's the most annoying bird.
Well, and here's the problem, is that I think that birds have the same problems we do in the summer. It's always frickin' light, and you never know when to go to sleep. And so the birds are always like, I don't know, it's light out, let's chat. And it's like, no, you shut up, I'm trying to sleep.
It's 3 o'clock in the morning.
Magpie.
Shut up.
Frickin' magpie should have made this list.
Oh, magpies.
Worst.
Yeah.
All right, friends. There you go. Now we're just rambling. We love you guys so much. Thanks for listening to episode 51 of the LeggLife Podcast. We're halfway to 102 episodes, Sherry.
All right.
All right, friends. We'll see you guys next week on the LeggLife Podcast. Bye.